ICQ Podcast episode 304, Training, Licensing and Growing the Amateur Radio Hobby. Well, hello everybody and welcome to this, our 304th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported by Donald Gover, Kilo Charlie 9, Zulu Mike Yankee, Nigel Wells, 2W0 Charlie Golf Mike, and John Baggett, Kilo 2 Bravo Alpha Golf, along of course with our monthly and subscription donors. This is our companion show between our normal regular shows, and this episode we're joined by Dan Romanchik, KB6 November Uniform, Chris Howard, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, and Martin Butler M1MRB joins me, Colin M6BLY, as we discuss training, licensing and growing the amateur radio hobby. Well, it's our donors that help keep this show advert free, and we'd like to thank the following guys for their one-off donations to the ICQ podcast. So thanks to John Baggett, K2 Bravo Alpha Golf, who said thank you guys for the great podcast, happy 11th birthday and cheers in 73. So thank you, John, for your kind wishes. Donald Gover, Kilo Charlie 9 Zulu Mike Yankee, says always look forward to your show as part of my commute. Keep up the great work, and here's to another 300 more. So thanks for those wonderful words to Donald. And Nigel, 2 Whiskey 0 Charlie Golf Mike, Nigel Wells, finishes off with, since discovering the ICQ podcast several years ago, I haven't missed a single episode. So great to hear, guys, that you're enjoying the show, and thank you very much for keeping us advert free. You can do your bit by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate. As we always say, think of the value you find on the show and pop it in a donation using PayPal, but you don't need an account, you can use your credit card, etc. And that helps keep the show advert free and stops us punting pills, mattresses, meat boxes and all those other weird things people sell on podcasts. Couple of quick announcements for you before we head over to our discussion. This weekend starts the International Air Ambulance Week. It'll be running through to the 15th of September with a focus on supporting and generating donations for flying medical services around the world. Covering this and next weekend through to the 15th of September, this gives amateurs a great chance in supporting, their local air ambulance operations. The stations are encouraged to promote donation calls, and donations can either go to the local calls or to the national calls as you so wish. Along with the donation drive and promoting the hobby, there's also an award scheme available as well for working a number of international air ambulance stations. So we'll pop details of this on ICQPodcast.com, where you might be able to claim your award for taking part in this wonderful event. Eddie DeYoung, Alpha Echo 7 Alpha Alpha of Florida, has been named the awards editor of CQ Amateur Radio magazine, and his first award column will appear in the September issue. He succeeds Ted Kilo 1 Bravo Victor, who served as the awards editor and USA Counties awards custodian for more than 20 years. So congratulations, Eddie, on your new role, and hopefully it brings you lots of joy. So as I mentioned now, Dan, Chris and Martin and myself, we had a discussion regarding training, licensing and growing the amateur radio hobby. As always, guys, we hope this generates some ideas for you, etc. But more importantly, if you have any ideas you would like to communicate back to us, feel free to visit ICQPodcast.com, click on the Contact Us section and let us know what you think. Hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Why, everyone, in this special companion show edition of the ICQ Podcast, we're talking about training and the training tiers, what it means about licensing and how it affects the growth of the amateur radio hobby. So what I've done is I've gone to 3 friends and fellow co-presenters who are our trainers, if you like. So from the US, the author of the No Nonsense guides to passing all 3 levels of the US amateur radio license, and I'm sure to cover any other ones that spring up in any post conversation. Mr. Dan Romanchik, KN6UB, if I remember rightly. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
Oh.
KB6NU.
KB6NU. I got to tell you, I need to drink more beer when I do these things. I tell you, I remember things more. And then from the UK, Martin M1MRB and Chris Howard, Mike Zero TCH, are with us, and they run the successful training courses in South London as part of the Sutton and Cheam club, which has an extremely high success rate through the 3 levels of the UK exam. So good day to you guys, and as I say, it's good to get everyone together from the training side of things as we look at the training. So hope everyone's okay.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Hi, Chris. Hi, Dan. Hi, Colin.
Although I would say we don't do all 3 levels. We do the foundation and we do the intermediate. We don't do a course on the full license.
Okay,
but yes.
But the important thing is you guys have also done the US licensing as well. So not only your full licenses in the UK, but you've also done various levels in the US as well. So it's good to get a good feedback from them.
Yes, we've done both, yeah.
So as I say, I suppose the reason for having a look at this in depth is as a total topic is because we've covered a lot of news stories on the show recently, and we've also had a lot of feedback as well. So we've had people talk about, does the amateur radio licenses as they are they a barrier to getting people into the hobby? And I know we've had people say to us, well, 3 tiers are great, but I can't give up X amount of time to get my people in. So I want this type of training course. So I want something that's less practical. I want something that's more practical. I want something that focuses on this part of the hobby or that part of the hobby. So I suppose let's look at the entry level in the UK and the US, which is the technician and the foundation license of those things there. Are they fit for purpose for getting people into our hobby? So, I mean, probably down from a US side first, in your opinion, that entry level exam, which I know you can get people through in a day, is that the right level for getting people into the hobby?
Well, I think so. I get criticized a lot for doing this one-day tech class thing. But what I always say is we don't want to make it so hard that it turns people away. Okay, we want to make sure they have a base level of knowledge, especially about things like safety and stuff like that. But we don't want to make it so hard that we turn them away. And so my point of view is that the tech test here in the U.S., at least, is just about right. There's always some tweaks we could make, but it's probably okay the way it is.
And just to clarify, so you pass your tech test in a day when let's say, for instance, you got someone who passed your course at Dating Handvention and they get their license. What exactly does that, for those who are not in the US, what does that give them rights to operate?
Oh, okay. So it gives them all rights above 30 megahertz. So they can do anything that any other class of licensee can do above 30 megahertz. And as we've talked about before on previous shows, that means they can use up to 1,500 watts on VHF and UHF. And it also gives them a small amount of HF privileges. They can operate CW on the 80, 40, 15, and 10 meter bands, and do single sideband and some digital modes on 10 meters.
Okay. So then, if
they're limited to 200 watts on the HF bands.
Right. So then, if we look at the UK model, so the UK model is, I know when we do you guys do Sutton and Cheam, you're looking at what, 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Saturday, if I'm right, in their model. Very biggest difference is the fact you have technical understanding skills assessments, don't you, in the UK license? Would that be correct, guys?
So, yeah. The actual course, the material is 2 days, and then we have a revision session and the exam on the Saturday or the weekend after. So we do it we do the material is covered in 1 day. We've then got a week to go away and revise and read the book and make sure they got everything in their head for the exam the week after. Mm-hmm. They come back on Saturday in the morning. We then have a revision session. We do a few tests. We do a bit of a fun revision session, which kind of we then get a good view on how ready they are for the exam, which they've already taken anyway, so they're already booked to take anyway. But anything where they're not sure about, we can answer any questions. We can make sure that they are as prepared as they can be for the exam on that day. But I think the key thing you're saying there, Colin, is I think the big difference between the UK and the American systems in the UK we have a practical element as well as an exam. And that practical element for the foundation is a number of activities, like, for example, they have to do a Morse appreciation, which is a fairly simple little Morse code activity we do with them. They have to go on the air on both VHF and on HF to make a contact. They have to Martin, I'll let you think. I forgot what they all are now, but there's a whole bunch of practical things you have to do, which means that you can't just turn up. So in the States, if you wanted to, you could actually walk into a test centre in the morning, having revised all three levels of. You could get all the three of Dan's books for the three different levels of license. You could read them all, and if you knew what you were doing, you could potentially walk out that night having passed all three exams. You can't do that in the UK because there was a practical element as well. So unless you manage to find an assessor to go through all the practicals of both the foundation and the intermediate, which I suppose you could technically do, and that would then last you for a year to take your exams. I suppose you could then turn up and take all. I suppose technically you could actually book in. I know, for example, at the RHB convention, you can take the exams there. You could actually take all three exams, I suppose, there in one go, but that'll be pretty difficult. So the difference mainly is around the practicals. Martin, I'll let you comment as well.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. And in many ways, I was a child of the previous system where it was, for me, a 90-question 90-page question, effectively, and you had to do that in 2.5 hours. There was, if you hadn't done your Morse, you got your full license, but you were only allowed above 30 megs until you did your Morse. Most of the questions, or a large proportion of the questions, were all based on HF and operating HF, so they expected you to do the Morse. But the thing is, and it's always been my biggest argument, is, okay, I had an electronics background before I went to do the course. Now, if you don't have an electronics background, but you're really interested, and you want to learn and you want help, the way I did it was very difficult for people. It was almost elitist, because if you didn't have an electronics background, you hadn't got a hope in hell of passing the exam. Now, roll back with the practicals. I mean, we do silly things, not as such silly, but they learn how to tune an antenna by shortening it to the right frequency to reduce the SWR. They learn how to put a station together for safety and one thing and another. So safety is very, very important in the early days. However, when I passed my test, God forbid, I will admit I was on CB for a little while, but in fairness, I wasn't allowed to do anything other than pass one greetings message if somebody else held the microphone before I passed my test. Now, if I'm learning to drive a car, if I'm learning to fly an aeroplane, if I'm learning to drive a powerboat, you at least get to do it and practice. And amateur radio was very, very preclusive there, but it wouldn't let you do anything until you pass your test. So in my instance, suddenly I passed my test, and I'm legally allowed to run 400 watts, having effectively never picked up a microphone, or I could have never picked up a microphone in my life. And that's what I think was wrong with the old system. There's never going to be a one system fits all, and as we go forward, unfortunately, people are in too much of a hurry. It's like, well, I thought about it on Friday night, I'll tip up Saturday, and I want my licence by Saturday evening. Well, it don't happen that way. You know, it's a bit like saying you could climb Everest in 30 seconds. You know, come on, if you're interested, you've got to put some commitment in. And there are other people in the UK that do the foundation much quicker than Chris and I. But we stand by the formula we have of we teach the whole book over a Saturday and a Sunday, 2 full days, with the practicals, and then we do a revision morning and the exam in the afternoon, second Saturday afternoon. And we get a high pass rate, not only of those that have got a lot of extra knowledge about electronics and have been doing radio and all those sort of things, we get people through that have never touched a radio, never understood what a soldering iron is. So, but they have an understanding, and that's why I think the current system's good. A long-winded answer, Colin.
Okay, so now I get my grenade and I pull the pin because I'm going to ask the question then. So then what, if we've made it potentially easier by bringing in 3-tier license systems, making tickets being able to be got in a day / 3 days max, why is it in an instant gratification world that we have people requesting full licenses in one full swoop? Why do we have people asking for more power, more at the lower levels? I think the Australians the other day were talking about, potentially opening up everything to an entry class license, etc. Are we fighting the difference between the ethos of the amateur radio hobby all being about experimentation, learning and developing against the instant gratification of a social media driven world of everybody must have and can have everything they want right now? Is this what causes the yearning for some sort of change, rather than actually suggesting the fact that the systems we have in place allow for a structured way of learning?
I think the problem is, and I'm going to go first on this, sorry guys, when you take a radio amateur license in the UK, you don't get a radio amateur license in the UK to chat to your mates down the road or whatever. The license is issued to you for the education of radio and self-training in radio. Yeah, it's to learn. And therefore, to just give it away easily is, in my opinion, would be wrong. To make it any easier would be totally wrong, because we've been missing out on what the license is about. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that when I took it, it did exclude a lot of people. Now, I think that we can bring people in that haven't got an electronics background. They get a lot of enjoyment out of the hobby, and they become very, very interesting people. And Chris will agree with me, there's been a lot of people over the last couple of years that have joined the club that haven't had any electronics background and have really, really got the challenge and are really learning and coming up with some really interesting discussions, which wouldn't have happened in my day. But I wouldn't want to see it made any easier, because if you could just go down a post office and get it like a CB license, then, or you don't have to do that even these days. If it became just like a CB license where you picked up a radio and you went on and you swore and you got annoyed, then the whole situation, it degrades the whole thing. And if you've got people doing it, say, in our country without licenses, bearing in mind they're talking to other people around the world. We're ambassadors for this hobby from our country to other people around the world. We've got to have a certain amount of technical ability. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I agree. I don't think the 3-tier system for me works because it's a gradual introduction. It's a gradual giving of privileges. So he starts off with a fairly small amount of power. It's enough to get on the air. It's enough to be able to get some experience of the hobby. Maybe operate on some of the higher bands and also on some of the HF bands, but with fairly limited amount of power, so fairly QRP amount of power. But it gives you that taste of the hobby, and it kind of makes you want to then progress to the intermediate and hopefully onto the full as well. The question though about should there be an option? I don't think we should go back to the single exam. I think because I think that just is very, like Martin was saying, I think that's quite elitist. It means it's just too big a jump to go from nothing to that. I think that gradual system works. Certainly, in my opinion, is much better. We're trying to get more people into the hobby, not less. And I think if you just go straight to that big full exam, people aren't going to bother, frankly. So I think if you want to get people in the hobby, that has to be the approach. However, people that have got, if you've got someone that's got a degree in electronics and I think perhaps they feel having to do all 3 levels of license, having to do the foundation, which for them is probably very, very simple, certainly in terms of the electronics and technical components. Certainly there'll be other parts of it, like the license conditions and actually operating and that, which they wouldn't necessarily know about, because that's not something that's to do with electronics, that's to do with the practical skill. But I think, someone that's got that sort of background coming on a foundation course is going to find it pretty simple, and probably is going to be a bit bored. And he's thinking, why can't I just go and take one exam and get the whole thing in one go? So I suppose to then perhaps being a little impatient and just want to get the thing done. And I can sort of have some sympathy for that view. I wouldn't want to say, if they were going to go with that option to say we're going to also have a single exam to go straight to full, then that's fine by me. But I wouldn't want to go away and then go and take away the two things. I wouldn't want them to take away the option of doing all 3. I would say that doing the single exam would be something that's done fairly rarely. I would certainly encourage people to do all 3 rather than try and go for the one exam, unless they really have got a lot of experience and knowledge about electronics. And secondly, I wouldn't want the practical element to go away either. I think that's quite important. I think having that, as you were saying, Martin, earlier, having that actual hands-on experience of operating a radio, I think actually is quite important before you then say, right, there's the keys to the sports car, off you go, sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. You don't when you learn to drive, you learn to drive by getting in a car and driving. You don't learn to drive from a book, do you? And it's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? I suppose. Yeah. I know in the States you don't have that practical elements. Yeah, which makes it a little bit simpler, but that's my thoughts on it.
Bring it to the States, because obviously, Dan, there is an opportunity in the States for you to jump from, shall we say, 0 to 100% and do all 3 exams in a day.
Oh yeah, and I know several, if not more, people that have done that.
I didn't want to put you on the spot in terms of numbers, but a perception. I mean, is it a low percentage of people that can actually achieve that, or try it, or go for it, or is it?
Oh yeah, I mean it's certainly less than 5% and more like 1 or 2%.
Yeah,
so it's very low percentage.
So it's
but so my take on all this is it's like, where do you draw the line on privileges for each class? Okay, for example, here in the U.S. now there's a movement to give technician class licensees, that's the first level of license here in the U.S., more privileges. And actually, what they're shooting for here is more HF privileges. So now they want to let techs operate some single sideband and digital modes in certain band segments. Okay, and I mean, I'm not against that, but I still don't think it's really going to do what they think it's going to do. The whole idea behind this is to give technicians a little bit of more experience on HF, because most of them aren't going to learn CW. I mean, I've actually worked some techs that on CW, but for the most part they're not going to do that. But so they're saying, well, if we give them a little bit of privileges to do this, then that'll spur them to get their general class licenses. And I personally just don't see it. I just don't see it. Mm. We had actually, and they did a big study on this. I mean, we had an entry level class committee here. The ARRL had this entry level class committee in existence for like 2 years or more. And they studied this. They went back into the history of it and all this stuff. And to me, it was really interesting because there's one guy who I know personally. I've met him at date, and we talked quite a bit about it. Who did this historical study? And we used to have what was called the novice class license here, and actually there is still some novice class licensees in the FCC database. But when it was first proposed, the novice class license was. The idea was to get people on the air quickly, okay? And in the early days, in the 1950s, there was a 5-word per minute code requirement that was required by international law. But the tech test, the technical part of the test, the written part of the test was so easy, anybody could have passed it. In fact, you'll be amazed by this, but there wasn't even a question about Ohm's law in the first version of the novice class license test.
Jeez.
And it was a 20-question multiple choice exam, and they sort of had a question pool, but not really. But there were only 28 quote unquote subjects that novices were asked to know about, and that's what the license manual covered, all 28. And out of those 28, only 20 were on the test.
Yeah.
So and now we've come to the technician class test, which is way harder than that old novice test used to be. Mm. So that I don't know where I'm going with that exactly, but just this, people say sometimes the tech test is too easy, but just contrasting it with what the novice test used to be, it's way harder.
I tell you what comes to my head as I hear you speak there, Dan, is because, again, we've looked at news stories in the podcast show over the last months, and they say, well, to boost the operation of this mode, this frequency, this band, this type of contesting, whatever it be, we should give more in the license. We should give more power, more features, more ease of access, what it be on the license. Now, my question then is the problem is it the case that our licensing structure is perfectly fine in a lot of respects, and we've got a marketing problem about getting people to use their rights, their privileges, or the benefits of upgrading, and rather than doing the marketing job of saying, okay, we need to be able to do X and Y and Z to market these functions of our hobby and get increases of usage of them, what we're doing is say, well, let's just give people more access. Let's give people more access to fix the problem.
Well, my take on this is that it's not the licensing, right? Because a license test will test what it does, but that doesn't. It's especially with volunteer examiners, right? You can't test enough to know who's going to succeed and who's not, right? So no matter how hard you make the test, if it's a multiple choice exam, well, all your testing is how well they can take exams. So what's required after the test is then have some training after the test. I haven't seen any of these practical elements you guys talk about, and no doubt that they're useful things, but I don't think you can have enough of them to make, so if someone gets through all those practical elements, that doesn't still say they're going to be a successful radio amateur, right?
Yeah, I suppose
it'll say that they can see that shortening antenna changes its resonant frequency, but there's so much else involved that that's not it. So what we need to do is provide somehow, and I know this is hard, and I've not been very successful at it myself. Provide somehow training after the fact. Have a, and I've blogged about this myself. Have a session where it shows them how to program their radios. Now we were talking about DMR before we started recording. Show them all what DMR is about and how to program their DMR radio. More stuff on antenna building, more stuff on soldering and stuff like that. And it's more than you can do in just even 2 or 3 weekends, I think.
Yeah. But the analogy I'm going to think of is, I throw it back to the UK guys, and I don't know if this quite works in the States, but you take lessons to learn how to drive, you pass your test, you get given a bit of paper, and then you're allowed to go and drive on the motorway at 70 miles an hour and never driven that fast before in your life. Is there some of that to be applied to radio as well?
I think there's all sorts of stresses in this. Oh, by the way, Dan, I'm one of the 1 or 2% because I did all 3 of your exams in one morning. But I was a full licensee in the UK, so that doesn't.
I've always said you're an exceptional person, man.
I'm an exception. So, no. But I was a full license, so that jesting. No, it's really difficult. I mean, okay, we've had in the past guys that have got degrees, they've been sent from the local company. I've got to do my amateur radio exam. It's part of my appraisal. I've got to do my amateur radio exam. I design radios for a living. I design military radios for a living. Now, they design them, right? So you start talking to them, I don't want to know. Okay, right. See, they sit the back, and you cover the syllabus, and they don't engage. Now, one thing that's very short-sighted, I remember one guy, I caught him twice, and after that he engaged and he came on board. I said to him, what happens when, when you're testing things, what happens if you've got a blown transistor? Do you not test them? What things? No, he said, I'll just go and grab a handful of transistors out of stores. He said, I'll keep putting them in until I find the fault. And I thought, well, if these are £5 a go, or $5 or $6 a go for argument's sake, you know, as an amateur, it's hurting my pocket, not a company. Number two, we were talking about making measurements and the difference between an analog multimeter and a digital multimeter. And a digital multimeter, when you're on resistance, puts the positive volts out on the red lead, as you'd expect. An analog multimeter, when you're on resistance, puts the positive volts out on the black lead. Now, if you ain't aware of that, you could actually think you've got the wrong sex transistor. So you could think you've got a PNP instead of an NPN. So little silly things like that we cover in the practical. We cover soldering and things like that. That is very, very useful. But I think one of the biggest problems we've got today, and I'm not against the three-tier system because I said I'm not, but I think we gave away HF to the foundation license holders. So everybody's going, oh, HF, I can get around the world. Oh, it's great. So I'll go on HF. And they go out and they buy their HF rigs. At the moment, we're at the bottom of the sun cycle. So you've got all these guys who are all enthusiastic and poor propagation, and they haven't cut their teeth in operating on VHF, which is fairly local. So I think that possibly the foundation license in the UK should not have given so many bands on HF. I think we should have held people up at VHF and above, and that way we would have actually had activity and people would have been able to find each other. Today,
can they work digital modes?
Yeah, they can work digital modes. But the thing being, Dan, is that the problem is if you've got, nine HF bands, is it? Plus you've got 6 meters, 4 meters, 2 meters, 70 SEMs. You've got all these bands and you're trying to find somebody. Everybody's spread out over all of it. So the people are saying, oh, well, the bands are dead, so I'm not operating, I'm not doing anything. Whereas if we limited them to 30 megs and above, they would have been using 2 meters and 70 SEMs and improving their operating skills. And it would have been an encouragement to go to the next level, I suggest. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I suppose we're slightly comparing the US and the UK systems here. So I'm aware that the foundation in the UK, the limitation is power typically. There's not, okay, so you can't operate abroad, you can't operate at sea, but the main limitation of the foundation license holder is that on most bands, they've got a restriction to only have 10 watts of RF output. Whereas the US system is you've got the full 1.5 kilowatts, whether you've got an extra, a general or a technician, so technician being the equivalent of the UK foundation. So you've got a full 1.5 kilowatts, which is a significant amount of power. But that's the restriction there is around what areas of the band you can use. That I find quite interesting. I was quite surprised. I think a lot of UK amateurs are surprised that someone that's done just the technician level of license can actually operate on 1.5 kilowatts. I don't know how many actually do, but that to me was quite surprising when I heard that as well. So that's a different way of doing it. Is like restricting it. Okay, right. So I get what you're saying, Martin. Only allow access to the higher bands of VHF and above. Sort of get that. my experience when I got my foundation was mainly in VHF and above. The first radio that I bought was the very popular FT817, which only operates at 5 watts anyway, so I was very, very much a QRP rig. And when I passed my test, which was back in 2009, I think, when I first passed my foundation, was at that point the sunspot. I think it was slightly better than it is now in terms of sunspot cycles, but it wasn't a very good peak that particular year or that particular cycle. And when you first start out, you don't really have that much experience about things like aerials, so you go away and you think, oh look, I can buy this wonder. I'm not going to say the brand name, but you can buy this little QRP little aerial you can plug in the back of a rig. I'll be able to work the world. And you buy it and you spend a lot of money on it, and you find, oh, actually, I don't work very well at all. I can hardly hear anybody at all. So you're kind of trying to use a lot of low power and a very compromised aerial because you don't really know what you're doing. So as a combination of not really knowing what you're doing and the lack of power, doesn't, certainly for me, made operating HF as a foundation license all the fairly disappointing. So I think it goes back to sort of Dan's point, is actually once you've got your exam, once you pass your exam, then following on and actually improving improving your knowledge. And I think that's where clubs very much fit in. The Elmering, going to a club and learning, and that's certainly what I've learned. The vast majority of what I know about radio is by going to a club, and you almost learn without realising it. You're around people that know about radio stuff. You go to talks. People come along and build things and show you things, and before you know it, you don't even know how you know stuff, but you know stuff. And I think that's how a lot of people, certainly me, have learned about radio over the years, is just by being around people that know about radio.
What part do the national associations they play in that? Because, say, for instance, in the UK, roughly 1 in 3 licensed amateurs in the UK are members of the RSGB, roughly. Possibly
and of course,
the same.
In the US, it's a lot lower.
It's even a lot lower than that.
1 in 5 now.
1 in 5. So, as a body that is there to protect our interests and help planning, when you talk to people on the planning committees, or you talk to people on the interference committees and things on those lines, the quality these people bring, and I suppose the wealth of knowledge these guys have got. What can they do, I suppose, not only just to increase their membership, but to help the new amateur into the hobby? I mean, for instance, should these national bodies be looking at giving the first year of membership to the organisation free of charge and getting their magazines and their training courses, etc., out to the new amateurs and helping them along as well?
No.
Well, you know what? What I always say is, what the ARRL should do, and what I try and do, is help more people have fun with ham radio. Okay, that should be like the basis of it. And in my view, a lot of that comes down to training, and I think, and I don't know, I can't speak for the RSGB, but I think the ARRL has been negligent about that. But having said that, they do have this new program called the Lifelong Learning Program, and I'm hopeful that it will do a good job. And its purpose is to do exactly that: is to help people, start out small, if you will, and then, inculcate amongst them this lifelong learning attitude, and have programs that. And I think a lot of this is still up in the air, what that actually means, but have some programs that will allow people to learn about different topics and thereby have more fun with ham radio.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Dan. I don't think, and I'm going to be defensive to the RSGB. They've done a fair amount recently. They were fairly stuck in the mud a few years back. There's been a lot of changes. The youth on the air scheme has been very good. They put a youth committee in. They've done a lot more on training recently, and all sorts of bits and pieces. However, it's not about what the RSGB can do for you. It's about what you can sometimes do for the hobby. Now, the thing is that we're all mentors. It doesn't matter who you are. You can all be an Elmer. You might know something that a full licensee doesn't know when you're a shortwave listener. So you might be able to help. We should all listen. We should all work. It's all about learning. And the kind of thing is, I think today's society is that everybody wants to be spoon-fed. Everybody expects, I've paid my X pounds, therefore I should get a license. Why are you telling me I haven't got this license when I've done absolutely nothing to get it? You've got to put back into the hobby. You can't. It's not a take. It's got to be a give and take, I think. Anyway, what do you think, Chris?
So back to the question, I think that Colin asked is really around the national societies. So what do they provide? Well, you get. I was trying to think really in terms of a beginner. You've got the things like Radcom, which is obviously similar to QST magazine. You get that monthly magazine. So it gives you a bit of exposure to the sort of things that are going on. Some of it, to me, is quite technical. There is a Radcom Basics now, which members can download from the website, which I think is actually a good idea. That's a new thing. It's been going on for a couple of years now. That's every other month they produce that, and that is very much aimed towards the beginner. And I think that's actually, I've been looking at it now the last few minutes online. I think that's actually quite a good one, because that gives people that kind of basic knowledge, that kind of learning about things. A bit like when you've had passed your driving test, you then go out in the car and then you really learn about things, don't you? You get to learn about how to really drive. So I think that's a useful thing from certainly in the RSGB as a national society. They provide that. I think there's things like award schemes. I think I don't know. I think the national society is there to help to promote the hobby to everyone. And I think the fact there are things like award schemes, and obviously that's not always done by national societies, and things like contests. I don't know. I think they give opportunities for people to use the radio for certain things, and I think it maybe helps you to think about because obviously we've got a very wide hobby. We all know there's lots and lots and lots and lots of different things that you can do in amateur radio, and maybe being a member of a national society gives you a bit of exposure by things like looking at the magazines, that sort of thing, about that how wide that hobby is. But as to how that's much different to joining a local club, you probably get something similar actually from doing the same. I'm not sure about as a beginner, apart from certainly in the UK, Radcom Basics, which is available to beginners. There's a huge amount that's I don't know. I think about this, and I'm sure someone from the RSB will come on and tell us why it's a good idea to join as a beginner.
But what you guys seem to be saying to me, if I read between the lines, is that actually the onus is maybe more on clubs being the important part of the ELMA process for the new amateur rather than the National Society. Would that be a fair thing to... am I understanding that right in terms of where people potentially could be brought into the hobby to help them gain that benefits of the bits and pieces of the hobby rather than saying, okay, just loosen up the licensing procedure. It's actually about bringing them into the hobby from day one, into clubs from day one as soon as they pass the first part of the hobby. So
I agree. I think that local clubs have a big part to play, certainly for beginners. However, the RSGB, most clubs are members of the RSGB themselves. They're affiliated to the RSGB, and the RSGB just provide some support to local clubs. So, they are helping, even if it's kind of one step removed. And they have things like the RSGB convention and National Hubfest that get involved in those things, and they're all about promoting the hobby. And so there are things at the RSGB convention people can go along to as a beginner to learn about things. So I think they do help. But I think for me, I suppose having a local club is probably the first step to once you pass your exams, once you've got your license, that's where you're going to go and learn about stuff. That's where you're going to learn not just about some technical things, but also about the various different aspects of the hobby that you can get involved with.
Yeah. Well, there's two disadvantages of relying on clubs. Okay, the first is a lot of clubs nowadays really don't have the level of technical expertise to help people. I've seen this a lot. I hear this a lot from people. They went to this local club and they tried to get help, and basically the guys just ignored them. And I don't think it's necessarily that the people in that club didn't want to help, but they weren't prepared to help. They're not prepared to be Elmers, and so that's part of it. Another thing is a lot of people just aren't joiners, and so a lot of people are just not going to get help because they don't want to go to clubs in the first place. I don't know. Is there some kind of and this is a problem with statistics. We talk about this with Frank K4FMH quite a bit. We really just don't know how many people out there aren't club members, and that all plays into it. I mean, I'd be interested in knowing, if I could, which I don't think the data is there, how many people in the UK are members, how many licensed hams in the UK are members of local clubs versus how many are members of local clubs here in the US. And I would say here in the US, it's certainly less than 50% and probably less than 25% even.
Yeah,
so those people that don't join aren't going to get any kind of Elmering at all.
And sure, that's potentially a great stat to know, and I don't think any of us have that answer. Is because sometimes you hear these national associations mention, roughly 1 in 3 are members of the RSGB, and then people give the RSGB a kick in for, if you can't be a representative body if you've not got a majority of amateurs signed up to you. But as you rightly say,
Right.
How many people aren't even members of a club? How many people are just, they've got their shack, they're working away quite nicely, the world's a happy place in their world, they've got their friends they've built up over a period of time and they're working away with, and that's what they do.
And the flip side of that is, I think a lot of people get a license just to get a license. They don't even really want to necessarily get on the air or be hams, quote unquote. And that's okay. I mean, I don't mind people taking my class if they just want to get that piece of paper. But that happens too.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, I also think that the club situation, it has to be relevant in today's environment. And we went through a period where a lot of our club's procedures and thought processes were still based in the 1950s. Now we've had a major upshake, and I think that a club has to be relevant. It has to be relevant to what the members want. We get more people turn up at our practical evening than we actually get on the main club evening, because that's what the club wants. I was talking to the guys from Long Island CW Club. And they've grown from nothing to over 200 members in just on 2 years. Why? Because they're doing what people want. They're training Morse code. Fine, that's great. So a club has to be relevant, and we also have to be ambassadors, and we also have to be passionate about our hobby. And if we're not passionate about our hobby, then the whole thing is going to fall apart. Now, the classic is when you talk to some of the old boys and you say, the first time you work the States from the UK or Australia, you get all excited. You go to the club and you tell them, and they go, yeah, done that, got the T-shirt, wrote the thesis. And you think, for God's sake, show a bit of excitement, Somebody might have only worked the next town. Show a bit of excitement and enthusiasm, because that develops the other person on and makes them have a sense of belonging. And we are sometimes bad at promoting the newbies into the hobby. That they often get put down very quickly, I feel, and I've seen it done too many times. Have you seen that your side of the pond, Dan?
Well, yeah, and I think that it's just like I said, is that ham radio has gotten quite technically sophisticated. In the old days when we were talking about tube circuits, pretty much anybody could learn that and then be an expert at it or be knowledgeable enough to pass that on. Nowadays, with SDRs and digital modes and computers and all this stuff, it's gotten quite technically sophisticated. And a lot of hams, even extra class hams, it's impossible to keep up with it, and then B, it's almost impossible to expect guys to then be able to Elmer other people, teach other people about it. And so I think that's what's happening with newbies. And people being what they are, they don't want to come off as being I don't know what you want to say, dumb or not knowledgeable. So they'll brush it off. They'll brush somebody off with a question like that, rather than look stupid by saying, well, I don't know, or give a stupid answer or something. And if somebody asks me that, I'll say, hey, look, I'm stupid. I don't know that question, but let's try and figure it out. And sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. But I think that's what's happening today with people that get brushed off, like you say, because the topics they're being asked about are just so complex now.
Yeah, but the thing is, Dan, and I found this a long time ago, the more you know, the more you realise just how little you know. And, anybody that gives a very difficult answer back or tries to be a really smart-ass answer back usually doesn't know the subject. And I know Chris had to ask me something on DMR about 4 times before I think I explained it as he understood it. But there's no dumb question. The only dumb question is the one people don't ask, right, in my opinion.
Well, you and I would agree on that. And we would work with that person to try and come up with a good, impart as much knowledge as we have to that other person. But some people just don't have that same attitude. I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law emailed me the other day, and she says, I asked somebody who's a mathematician what complex numbers are, and the woman just laughed at me. She said, was that a dumb question to ask? And I gave her the exact same answer. I said, well, no, it's not a dumb question to ask. Probably she didn't know enough about it to be able to explain it to you. So I took a shot at explaining what complex numbers are to her. And, this person is not a real, really is not mathematically inclined, my sister-in-law. But I did my best. And I would do the same with any ham who came to me with a question about whatever, But some guys don't do that. Some guys, they're asked a question, they don't really know the answer, they don't want to look stupid, and they clam up. And that's where you get people, feeling like they've been brushed off or, dissed.
And I'm going to go into it, just following on from that point. The other thing I think which is missing as well, a little bit from amateur radio, is the fact that you pass your test and that's it for life. You've got a license for life, and all the rules can change. All of the, I don't know what it's like in the States, but certainly here in the UK, the license changes every so many years, and the license conditions change.
Yeah.
And
the technology certainly changes.
And the technology changes. And we're currently going through a change of syllabus here in the UK, so they're now going to start to talk about SDR technology in the exam. And you did your test 30, 40 years ago. What you were tested on has not completely changed because the theory is still the same, and aerials probably haven't changed that much. But some of the digital stuff, some of the stuff for software-defined radios and digital modes and things like FT8, none of that you'd know about. And certainly some of the licensing stuff. And I've heard arguments on the air, you're pedestrian mobile, you're not mobile. And it's because maybe in 1968, those are the rules. But it's now 2019, and those rules have changed. Is there not a case to actually say, well, maybe not a test, but some sort of refresher training or some sort of, if there are certain tests where it expires after a certain amount of time, and this is going to be a little bit controversial, is there an argument to say that you should have to do some sort of reset or refresher every so many years?
You can cut this out if you want, Colin, but I'll tell you a funny story. I was talking about this with a friend of mine one time. He says, he and I both were saying, hey, you know what we should do? We should come up with like extra certifications and then like charge people like $10, $20 for it. Come up with our own, extra plus exams.
That sounds like a McDonald's name badge. They used to give stars, if you could use the till, if you could flip a burger type of thing,
like that.
Yeah.
So we still have that. We still have that in the back of our mind. But that's the idea. I mean, that's still the actual idea you're talking about, Chris. Is that, if we say, hey, this would be like a real, I'll use the term real extra if you can pass this test. And then I can even make study guides for the real extra test. So you see, I got this all thought out.
Exactly. You know what though? This is a lot of hobbies I think can sometimes suffer with this. That some people come into a hobby just for social reasons, and some people come in because they get ultra competitive, and some people come in because they want to show the best teacher or the best knowledge base, and some people just want to plod along. And I mean, I think a lot of the problems that amateur radio is experiencing are no difference from a martial arts or a baseball team or probably a knitting class or a reading group or all sorts of things. They're all
right.
It's okay. We've got different widgets, to different hobbies, but the problems are still technically the same, and I think it's understanding those problems and I suppose in some respects, I mean, we talk about my job, if we knew the right account manager or right sales development person to go visit the customer, we win every single business. But because you don't know the person very well before you go, you can't match the right person to the right person. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here is saying, okay, right, we've got this guy, a girl, they've passed their exam, great. Then what we need to match them with somebody of similar mindset to them, if you like, their clone, and then help them come through the process and they enjoy the hobby even more. But that's really difficult, if they're not going to come forward and join a club. That's not difficult if we don't market to them correctly. That's going to be very difficult if we, if we don't understand that person, we don't take time to develop them. But that's the same in every hobby.
Yep. No, you're right. I think you're right.
As fun as said, by the way, my suggestion of doing a reset every so many years, I was playing devil's advocate. I don't want to have to wear body armour when I go to the Hamfest, just so you know, okay?
I was going to say Chris would be the guy in the orange shirt, but that line's at about 6 of us for the smack, But, I mean, don't get it wrong, Chris. I mean, is there an element that says if you can't prove that you're active for X period of time, you should do some sort of reset?
Well, that used to be a rule in the U.S. That used to be a rule in the U.S. If you couldn't, when we had to renew our licenses, I think every 5 years, the rule was that if you were asked, you had to show your log and we had a log at that time. You had to show your log to the FCC to prove that you'd been active so many hours during that previous 5 years.
Mm. I mean,
and that rule went away. I don't know when, but. Yeah, we no longer have that rule here.
I mean,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I would agree that should be, because we know we have people that come in and go out of the hobby for various reasons. That they they have life events that mean that we get people that have been licensed years ago and they drop out of the hobby and they come back in. So I wouldn't want to exclude them from the hobby just because they hadn't been involved for a while. Now, doesn't mean to say that when they come back they want to do a bit of refresher training or but I guess that's perhaps up to them.
Yeah.
Well, so just to take a step back, this is what the ARRL Lifelong Learning Program is about, I think, and because there hasn't been a lot of information about it, but I think that's what this is about. And like I keep saying, if done right, this could be what the hobby needs. I'm envisioning courses on software-defined radio, courses on APRS, courses on all this stuff, and if done right, then those who really want to be technically proficient can take these courses and continue to advance in the hobby. The people that want to be social, they can just be social. That's good. People that want to be emergency communicators, well, there's some courses already out there for that. And the trick is to be able to serve all those things that ham radio is. And I was taken to task by my section manager, who is the ARRL section guy in charge of Michigan. He said when he saw my blog post, sort of praising the lifelong learning program, he sent me an email. He says, "Are you all right?" Because I'm often critical of the ARRL, but I think in this case, if done right, like I said, this could be a really great thing.
Yeah. So in wrapping up, I think what we're saying is that the license systems currently in the UK and the US, we seem to think are fit for purpose. And whilst you could potentially, do all three in a day in the States, obviously, it is a very low percentage of people that actually achieve that. So in essence, the staged appearance thing. But we are looking at potentially that the role of the clubs and the role of the individual to understand all the different joys after they get their license, maybe the marketing towards those people and help them become more technically proficient is very important to bring people through the levels or to bring their knowledge up, etc., as they go on their journey, would be beneficial. And be that be an ELMA in a club or be that be the national societies publicising information, that would be beneficial to people to bring them along and on board along the way. So certainly also some interesting food for thought there, guys. And hopefully, as I say, you guys have got something from our chat about the different systems and what's been going on. As always, we'd recommend you visit ICQPodcast.com, click on the content section if you'd like to give us your feedback for now. To find out more about the Sutton Cheam Amateur Radio Society and their training courses and events, visit scrs.org.uk, and that's where you'll find Martin and Chris's next course, which I think's coming up soon, if I remember rightly, isn't it?
I was about to say, actually, can I give a little plug there? So we're doing a foundation course on the 19th and 20th of October, and we're doing the revision session the weekend after, and the exam the weekend after. That's the 26th. So basically, we're doing a course mid to late October. If people want to get on that, they need to get all of us fairly quickly because places are limited, and we need to get all the paperwork sorted out with the RSGB. So if people do want to get involved or live in South London or want to visit us and do that course and that exam, then please get in touch. And like you said, that's the website that Colin mentioned there, scrs.org.uk/training is the page that will tell you about the course.
And I can confirm Martin makes a great cup of tea and a cup of coffee on that course. Well worth doing for now. Dan is the author of the No Nonsense Guides, as well as being a presenter on the ICQ podcast. You can check out his blog and his study guides at kb6nu.com. As I say, and certainly the work Dan does there. Dan, I'm sure you'll be doing another one-day course at next year's Hamvention. Would I be correct in saying so?
Well, you know what? I'm not sure about that. But my next one-day course here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, is on September 28th. And the information is at kb6nu.com, just like you mentioned.
Perfect. So, guys, if you take part in any of those courses and pass, let us know on the show and we'll give you a shout as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. So, say that's Dan, KB6NU, Martin, M1MRB, and Chris, M0TCH. Thanks up for joining us. And hopefully, guys, you've enjoyed our discussion about training on this ICQ Podcast companion show. Hope you enjoyed.
Cheers, guys. 7-3.
7-3.
For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.